Okay, live from my studio in Lexington, Kentucky. Here we are, afternoon. John Celestre, John the Animator Guy, and glad to see you all. I've got a guest today, and it's Ryan Wynn. Oh, there he is. He's checking everything out. Hi, Ryan.
I'm hitting like on our video already, just to make sure it's got some thumbs up.
Now, what happened is that a couple of days ago, when I put this on Monday, I I already, without even going live and streaming, I had a thumbs down. So I was wondering that YouTube is a really tough audience.
Maybe it was someone who was waiting, and they just gotten tired of waiting, and they were like, "That's it. I'm done waiting."
Boy, you talk about I said going live, in 2 days, and they go, "Oh, wait a minute, I can't wait for that."
It's an impatient world, John. They're impatient. They want your product, John. What can I say?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. Let's see. When I go live on Indiegogo for the Kickstarter in September, we'll see how that shows up. So anyway, we're going to talk about. Good.
Oh no, I was going to say they're going to show up. They're going to show up plenty.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about what's worth showing up for, and that is the idea of the whole topic of this conversation is about if you say you've got an idea for a series or a comic or a novel or whatever, but do you really have something? How much? As they used to say, ideas are a dime a dozen. Now, you may have an idea for something, but when does it actually come into developed into something that people will want to actually spend the time to read or participate in, right? And it's not like you can just say, "Oh, well, here's my elevator pitch." Okay, that's fine, but what are the elements in there? I mean, you boil everything down to 15 words, and all right, but those 15 words sound like the same 15 words somebody else may have said, and so what makes it different? Did you have to do that for Gods and Gears? Did you pitch it out? Did you develop it first and then boil it down to 15 words, or what?
Well, let's see. So this goes back almost. Oh yeah, this goes back to 2012. The idea, and the original idea was a print that I'd made for a convention. I didn't want to make prints of trademarked characters or copywritten characters. Batman, Spider-Man, everyone else at the con, whether they'd worked on that property or not, was selling prints of these characters that they didn't own. And whenever I did conventions, I wanted to do something different. Sometimes I would sell these prints of characters that I worked on. Like I got myself up, I worked on Batman books, so I felt that I earned selling some Batman prints. And that was sort of the unspoken rule between the companies and the artists. And then once conventions blew up and they were inviting anyone in, you had all these people who had never worked in comics that are all selling Batman prints and Spider-Man prints and this or that. And so I wanted to do something different. So I came up with these characters called Driver and Shotgun. And I came up with a car with a sidecar, which I thought was super goofy but a fun visual idea. And I just made a print of it. And selling the print at conventions, you're sitting there, you're looking at the print, people are coming up, they're asking about the characters. And so I started an idea then. So it started with an image, and then I decided, I'm gonna do a little comic about these guys. And it was just about the two of them. And the idea, here's the thing, it was an idea, just like you said. It wasn't a story. I hadn't come up with a story, but I thought I had. So it was, I'm going to place it in 1910 around the time when that type of car was built, and I like the history of racing. So this will be an alternate world where I'll study the history of racing in our world, and I'll put it into this story. And the more I kept studying the history of racing, the more I was writing a fake biography about the history of racing, and I wasn't writing a story. I wasn't developing characters, and it took me a long time to realize this. It took me until I had actually even developed a few pages and found an artist, because I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle the art and the writing. And when I was talking to my artist friend, who was a friend of mine before this, Dean Kotz, he was the one asking all these questions, because he's very story driven in his art. So it was a lot of, well, what about this? What about him? What about her? Why that? And it was always his, but why that? And then I'd be, because I want it to. Yeah. And then he's like, well, see, that falls apart right here. And then you're like, oh, you're right. Oh, yeah. So then I had to create a story, not an idea.
Yeah. And that's, and usually that's how stories come about. You just don't know. I mean, sometimes it just comes out of, now, professional people who do this for a living, cranking out, like the old pulp magazine actor, they would say, okay, we got to pump stuff out. And the same way with basically TV. That's why TV is so tough, because it demands 22 stories a year, and that's where why it is, if you need a story or a what is it called, a conflict generating world in which you can generate stories. But
exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But even that, though, you have to have, what is this place about? What is it about your main character that people will care about? Right? And so, in comic books, we are so driven to have, graphics. But if the graphics are only pinups, then after a certain point, they're, so what? I don't want to, why do I have to turn this page? Why do I have to spend this money for the next thing? Because basically, after a certain point, there's only so much of like, it drawn, into this and what have you. Well, what about these characters? Why should I care? Why should you have to invest for people to come back. And as the old saying is, people, come for the plot. They look at the plot, but they come back for the characters. And that's TV. Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of true across the boards with just storytelling, though, Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, then some people only have one story to tell, and they don't think about ongoing, which is another thing now that you're, Alterna is now thinking about, or at least that's saying an ongoing series. If you decide to do it, you have to think in those terms of how to generate something and a world where people will want to come back. It's not just one, it's not one big story that never ends, because that is, for me, that's a problem. I get bored with that.
No, that is a problem, and that's something a lot of new creators start with. They start with, I have the 100-issue epic that I want to tell, and I'm always the person when people come to me. I'm always the poo-pooer, if you will, where it's I try to encourage, like, well, why don't you start with a 4-page story? Mm-hmm. And then maybe do an 8-page and then a 12. And these can all be in that world that you want to create. But start small and start with reachable, attainable goals. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're new to writing and you're going to be going through all the stuff we're talking about. You want to figure out, beginning, middle, and end with 4 pages before you have to figure that out with 100 pages. You know?
Yeah, well, a lot of people think that is, oh, geez, that's a waste of time. Why don't I just do it? Well, it's not, it's practice. You know, I mean, you know, a perfect way, you know, the old days had the backup stories, and that would be a 6-pager usually, you know, in the comic books. So you do a 6-pager. Well, okay, can I actually do something that has a beginning, middle, and end with 6 pages, you know, and really milk all that. Now, people talk about The Spirit. Those were 7-page stories. 7 to 8 page stories. And he started off with about 7 pages, and then 8 pages, and then he really developed the splash page. So you basically had 7 pages, not 8, 7, because the splash page was the cover, pretty much. You know, it was an intro. And splash pages in the 40s and 50s were basically, you know, the teaser for the rest of the story. You know, you go back and look at those, and you say, what can Batman so and Robin can, you know, defeat the Joker in this such and such, and they usually have some kind of perils of Pauline, you know, the Joker is throwing them down into a vat or what have you, and so they spend a page just, you know, just to entice you to come on. And today, I think that there's almost, and this is old man talk, I think almost every page is an enticement, you know, because I really find a lack of character development in so much stuff. Everything is a pinup, you know. But getting back to what we're saying, if you could take 6 pages and use 6, 7 panels per page to develop your story, you know, you've got a nice little story. You have a short story. So,
yeah, and if you've never written, if you're new to writing, or even just drawing, that's why I always encourage people, like, start with these short stories. Don't just do a practice page of just panels. Like, actually work on a story, but make it short, because going through that process, whether it's for 4 pages, 20, or 100, going through that process, like you said, it's practice. And a lot of people don't think about practice. I try to encourage that in my inking videos too. And I usually use sports as an analogy. You go to a sports game, any sports game, I'll use basketball. That's what I like. You go to the basketball game, you show up 20, 30 minutes before the game starts. All the players are out there doing little shots. And then they back up and do shots from further. And then they do 3-point shots. And then they run and do layups. And they run these drills, and they're stretching and they're warming up. They're not just playing the game.
Right.
The game is built by practice and repetition of these actions that you go through and these motions you go through. And then when the game comes, oh, I've already done this. I've practiced shooting this ball from here to here X amount of times. So I put that to use in the game. And it's the same thing with art or writing. The more I write, the more I learn writing is like drawing. The more I see how structure comes into play and things like that. That's what's going on in my brain recently, is the convergence of that. But, you know, you got to practice these things before you go out and execute them well.
Right. Well, there are so many different things about how to convey a story that people don't seem to understand. It's not, I'll start on page 1 and work all my way all the way to the final page, and then, oh, I didn't think this out, I gotta go back. You wait. You have, and this is just a plot. No matter what kind of story it is, you still have to have pillars and posts and guideposts that, you know, this whole thing is your beginning, middle, and end, but this is what happens in the beginning, this is what happens in the middle, and this is what happens and this is how they get to that point. And then there's story beats. They are, and you don't say this, you to me, the beats are somebody, has something, wants to do something, somebody else wants to take it away from them. Okay, you just have conflict. That is as much as anything else, no matter what. Just have the abstract aspect of, okay, happens here. This person does that to this person. What happens that somebody else comes in, brings in somebody else. A henchman says, okay, I owe you this much money. I'll do this, and so on. And you start putting those elements together. Now, those elements, you'll lay that out. You don't know who those people are, but those are the aspirations, and those are things to overcome. You have to come up with a bright idea for this, but those are still basically, you build a house a certain way, and you have the basic theory of what works to hold structure up. That's what you're doing, laying down that foundation and laying down, saying, okay, I have to have the posts of the corners. Okay, what I do with that corner is, okay, this is all you can do with it, but whether you make it a small log cabin or a mansion, things have to be in a certain position for it to hold up.
Exactly. Yes. And that's where, like I was saying, I've been converging writing and drawing, or finding the similarities in my brain. So it was basically, my story is the same as when I draw a human head. I draw this circle, I draw the jawline, I draw the dividing line, and I set up all those dividing lines. They set you up for where everything goes. And the more I learn about writing and story, I'm like, oh, it's the same thing. You have to see the whole laid out lightly, and then as you develop and split up the story in certain ways, it automatically sort of dictates form and function with that. And so when and I see young artists, creators and writers and artists struggle with trying to bypass that. So many young artists like, I don't want to draw the cross piece on the face. I just want to go in and draw the eyes. And then you see the eyes they've drawn are off, and they have to erase and keep moving that eye, erase and keep moving that eye. And it's the same thing with writing too. If you're not following some structure, you're going, and not that you have to. This thing, it's not a rule that you have to follow. I think of it as guides that But if you're not following something, you're not going to form a shape. That story isn't going to come into a shape that people can see and interact with.
Yeah, well, there are certain structures. Okay, so there are technicals, there are crafts. Pulp novelists were very craft oriented because they knew they had to pound out so many pages and so many words, and with the old pulp novels, they were cranking out, like The Shadow. The pulp novel. Max Gibson. His really was Walter B. Gibson. He was he wrote under Maxwell Grant. And Walter B. Gibson was a magician. He was sort of like Houdini's biographer. He would do things. He was a magician himself, but he cranked out 250 to 60,000 word novels a month. That was, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. He was doing the Shadows were like, they would be published every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks they were cranking them out like that. He did that for about 10 years.
That is a lot of writing.
Yeah, and you've got to know how to do things. Obviously, you crank it out and you do something. His theory was, and with just to keep it interesting for himself, he had to come up with an idea that would allow that lead people on to say, okay, I'm learning something new about the Shadow almost every issue. And he starts developing the whole thing. So it wasn't the same story every issue. And that's something that he had to start making up new things, after a certain point, just what can you do? I mean, so when you do like yourself, you and a number of the other Alterna artists or creators are going to be thinking and dealing with, ongoing series, and that's something that people, don't know what a load that can be, lifting.
Yeah, it's something I feel like I do understand, because I'm approaching it with the let's see if I can do this a mentality, which is kind of how I approach everything. It's I get my gumption and my bravery up. I arm myself with knowledge, and then I start up the hill.
Yeah. And
I see how far I can go. So I do know how daunting an ongoing series can be, but I'm up for the challenge.
Right. Well, if you look at this is nothing new. I mean, people are doing this all the time, but to have a one particular vision, I wouldn't go to the comic books, except for the early ones by Simon and Schuster with Superman and such. If you go to the comic books of the 1930s and 40s, or rather the comic strips, the newspaper strips, they produced every day, and a lot of those adventure strips were all done by one person who would roll out stuff. Usually, it was a writer or a creator who did both things. And the biggest ones for me was more like, I'll say, Chester Gould with Dick Tracy. Okay. If you follow that, that is if you read a run of them, you'll see how he starts leading in from one story to the next one. And if you actually calculate, what was done for Sundays and for 6 days a week, you put them all together and just remove the panels that were kind of like just recaps, because every day it's structurally okay. You had in the old days, you had 4 panels for each daily. Okay, the first day was a recap of what had happened the previous day. The second panel, pushed the next and introduced something new. Third one developed something else, and then you had the cliffhanger. Then you go back, and so on and so forth. So you remove one panel. So, but basically, they were doing 24. If you just put them together in 6-panel pages, including the Sundays, you had 24 pages of comic book a month. That's what they were doing.
Oh, and so then they started grouping those together.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So I knew that's how the first comics were grouped together, comic strips, but then that also kind of explains why some of the grid systems that we ended up working off for comic books, because they were doing a 16 by 16 or a 16 by 20 depending grid, and then once people started publishing in that format, people started working in that format.
Right.
Sorry, I'm putting history together in my brain out loud as this is fun and interesting to me. Okay.
So this is so basically it is like, in the last episode this happened, and then we move it forward, and so here's your cliffhanger. Read what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, you pick now, and that was one of the cool things about it. Remember, newspapers were fish wrap back then. No one collected them. So a person had to, if you had a brand new reader, they at least had to know what happened before to understand what was going on in the strip, so you could then pick it up and keep on going.
And you could miss a few days.
Yes.
You know, I grew up reading, the big fan of the comic strip, the newspaper comic strips, and you could miss a couple days, and especially those classically styled ones where they knew to give you the recap, whether it was Dick Tracy or For Better or For Worse or any of the whatever style it was. They all did that, and you could miss a few days and get caught up in the next few days just because of the recaps and things like that. And yeah, I always loved that format, and I still love it. I even did a comic a few years ago where we pretended that somebody in the comic book made a comic strip so that we had reason to make a few. You know, we only did like 5 or 6 just to play with the idea, and it was really fun. But as a kid, like you mentioned, Dick Tracy, by the time I was reading, it was one of the fill-in artists that was just working in Gould's style or whatever. But the characters are so dynamic, and the art style is so fun, and I like a good pulpy mystery. That as a kid, I couldn't wait. If they teased that, like, oh, so-and-so, whatever messed up face guy is going to be in the next thing, like they tease that, I'd be like, oh, I can't wait for tomorrow's strip to see him or her or whatever character, because especially Dick Tracy, because it was so much fun, and again, visually fun. Every character, their own unique shape and form and lines, but somehow all worked together. They all lived in the same world, even though their head shapes were all different and stuff. But they set you up so that you wanted to see that character visually and know what was happening.
Well, and the other thing was that the strips were much bigger. I mean, newspapers. When I was growing up, the New York Daily News was a tabloid, but a full tabloid, which is like about 11 by 17. You know, it wasn't a broadsheet. A broadsheet is twice that. You know, when you look at the old days of the New York Times, you know, they were quite large. Okay, but for the Daily News, there was a tabloid, so they did it half-wise, but still, it ran across, each strip ran across the top of the page, and so you had about 10 inches of comic strip on top there, and maybe about 3 or 4 inches on the top. So it would go right all across the top there. So you can visually, you had a chance to at least look at stuff, look at and take in the visuals, versus it being a postage stamp sized panel.
Yeah, we signed up. We gave it to some charity last year, and one of the things that they gave as a return was a subscription to the Sunday Times. So I started getting the Times again. I hadn't gotten a physical newspaper delivered in years.
Right. And
something I realized was I kind of missed the aspect of the newspaper, especially as far as certain visuals were in mind. So, like you said, a lot of the comic strips, they are small. They're the 4 strips. It's 7 inches by maybe 2 or something like that. But it was still kind of neat to read the Sunday comics again, and to realize that some guys I liked, like Bizarro and a couple guys from 20 years ago, they're still in business, and I was able to even find them online, which was great. But then the first couple weeks in, there was in the arts thing, there was a big painting a big illustration done for a book, and when I opened the newspaper, there was this giant illustration that was beautiful and made me want to dive into that article. And I was like, oh my gosh, this does not happen online. I never go to a media site and there's just this grand image that's bigger than the screen that takes me away. And I didn't realize that, like, how important print is. I mean, I've always realized how important print is, but even just for that effect, it took me till last year to open a newspaper and have that happen again, for me to be like, oh, big imagery is impactful.
It is, especially in today's visual. I mean, we are so visually oriented, but people don't. But no one will print things out. You know, once again, you know, it's too expensive. But you know what? Computers are damn expensive to keep upgrading every 3 to 4 years, and newspapers and comic books especially. You know, that's the medium that I would like to, that I'm trying to work in. And I know I can't do what Alterna does, which is, you know, at least, you know, I can't do 500 copies because I don't have the space for it, you know, to do that. So, but I'll do, you know, the A3, so which is the 8.5 or 8.25 by 11 3/4 size, and that's what my books are going to be. So,
very cool.
Page, you know, it'll be substantial. It'll be bigger, you know, much bigger than what a regular comic book will feel like, you know, is. So,
I like that. I can't wait to see that. That's going to be great with Megamoose and stuff. Those panels and those colors are going to look incredible at that size, especially having 2 big pages like that when you've got that book open.
Yeah. And so I'm figuring, okay, that would, to me, and I know we're going off a little bit, but when we're creating material, think about what is it that you're giving, especially in crowdfunding. It's not just the story. What is it that you're giving somebody, and you know, to justify, you know, giving, you know, supporting your book, give them something that they don't normally get. And so, you know, we'll see what happens on that. But just to get back to the idea of the story,
yes.
I remembered when I was doing, this goes back to Rock and Rule, and this was animation. And that is, you take a couple to create something new. Everything has been done pretty much, but you take a couple of cliches. Okay, you take a certain type and a certain type, but then you put them together and you give them a twist with your own particular way. Then suddenly you can create something brand new. You know, and so, you know, when I did Cindy Schlepper, you know, the gal on roller skates, you know, I said, okay, they gave me just this one image of basically one of her brothers, you know, just pigtails and a dress, and that was it. Do something with it. So I said, okay, she's you know, what was her purpose in the story? And said, well, she's got to get Angel out of some blah 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 blah, you know, and then she goes out and dances. Okay, well, so I did a list. I wrote down all the characteristics and personality aspects of Cindy Schlepper, the way I saw her, as how old she was, you know, and what her mannerisms were, and what she wanted to do, and you know, she wanted to be, you know, she's a dance, she's a fun gal. You know, she's always chewing gum, or she's doing stuff and she's playing around. She's always very, very high energy and impactful, and she's kind of like a Valley girl. And that was 1983. No, 1980, 81. Okay, so disco roller skating was the thing for her, but that was maybe like 2 or 3 years old at the time. You know, the disco, you know, skating business. So anyway, so you take that, and then you, as I said, like when you are stuck to create something just from whole cloth as an exercise, you know, as I said, take cliches, take a bunch of them that seems to be, you know, that don't seem to belong, put them together, give a twist, see what can you do that will make it, you know, just it's your vision, your own idea. Don't try and do something out of whole cloth, because you can't. You just don't know what has been done before. You know, and so go with that as an exercise. Then you start saying, okay, I have an idea for a story. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
different about this story that's not been done before. Well, it's sort of like this and sort of like that. Okay, the pitches for a lot of TV shows saying it's Towering Inferno meets the Muppets. Okay, well,
You know, when I was young, that's what I thought an elevator pitch was. I didn't know an elevator pitch was the pitch you say in an elevator, you know, the quick thing you say. I thought an elevator pitch was this meets this.
Yeah.
So I thought an elevator pitch meant one of those stories where you've taken two elements and brought them together. So until I was old enough to pitch a book, that's what I thought it was. So I would be talking, I would teach this to my friends, like in high school. I'd be like, oh, an elevator pitch is this story meets this story. And then I got older and met some real creators, and they're like, that's not what that means. I was like, well, all right.
Yeah.
All right. You'll learn. But I always liked that idea, though. You know, even though I had the wrong term for it, I like that idea of taking the two things that you know, put them together, and then run your personal experience through it.
Right. And that's what you have to be able to do, because I remember when I tried to start writing, and this is, I'm like, 18, 19, 20 years old. What was it? Somebody says, you have to have experienced something, before you could write about it. You can't, and this is once again, if you do a comic book, and if the only thing you know is other comics, well, I'm sorry, you're not bringing anything new to it. Which is another reason. For example, I was going through and reading a book that Will Eisner did, which was called Shop Talk, and it was a compilation of all of his. Okay, you're familiar. He talks with Joe Kubert back. And this was, Kubert had just started his school in New Jersey. So this article this interview is about 1980, 1982, and Kubert is, they're talking, back and forth about artists. And in comic books, when they started, they were all, fine arts people who couldn't find a job in the Depression. So it was a job to them. And so therefore, what they were bringing to it was their art training, their classical art training. They wanted to be fine artists, or just even be commercial artists for the slicks, or illustrators, or do things of that sort. But comic books came about, so we'll do that. Well, they were already bringing something brand new to it. Okay? And there were writers who were trying to be writers, but they couldn't crack the pulps. So they come to that, and so people are bringing their experiences to that. Kirby always talks about living in, his thing is with the Gas House Gang. Kirby grew up in Hell's Kitchen. So that was about as tough an area as you could be. So he always brings that into his sense, but he wasn't like, he's a self-taught artist on the job, basically. But anyway, he wanted to tell stories and what have you. But back then you didn't have comic books. You might have had comic strips, but comic books were different from comic strips, very much so. But today, what Kubert was saying is that he has people coming to his classes or his school, and they're fans of comics, and they love comics so much, but they weren't bringing anything else to it. They were just bringing, this is what I enjoy, and I want to do that, which is what happened to comic books, and I'm not making this stuff up. He's saying things have changed so much is because it's people who are fans that are drawing for other fans. Whereas when when comic books started, and it was written and drawn and created for the general public, that's why it could reach out to so many different people. You know, it's when it started boiling down into the fans and to the shops and such that and I know that you have the circumstances about a newsstand, and you know you can't find comics in there, but once again, it's if you don't have material that's for a general public, how do you expect people to be introduced to that? Why should they be interested in it? You know, if everything is a niche, all you have is a whole bunch of niches, and that won't introduce somebody else. They won't bring any element, you know, a new audience to your work.
Yeah, it's one of the things that seems to be lost on a lot of creative types, where they think I am an artiste with an E at the end and an apostrophe. I am an artiste. Yeah. I am putting this out there for people to like my art. And that's fine if you are purely being an artist/artiste. But if you are putting out commercial work that is supposed to move product, bring in new readers, etc., you have to be willing to reach out to a wider audience. And that doesn't necessarily mean blanding your story down or anything like that. A lot of times creators will use that defense of like, oh, you just want me to make it cookie cutter or McDonald's. And I totally get that. I've had that experience and this or that, but I've also had people kind of guide me towards, no, it's finding the thing in you that others identify, how do you identify with the rest of the world, and they will identify with you back that way. So it's not you have to identify with my personal thing. It's what's our commonality? What's that? What do we have in the same? What do we have going that's the same that I can put into this character that you will relate to?
Right.
You know, it's not forcing a general audience to, because I'm a weird, quirky guy in real life. Like, you know, we think our own things about politics or social issues or whatever. But there's so many of those things. Well, I'm not going to put that into a book because the general audience that's not a general audience thought process or something like that. You know, like I want to write for the person that isn't the weirdo artist. I want to write for the person that is not creative at all. I want to write for the person that's purely looking for escape. Right. You know, and if I can make myself happy creatively while reaching out to a bunch of people, then I've done my job.
Right. Well, when the most, what's the word? Relatable characters all share universal aspects with their audience. I mean, you know, with people who can understand, you know, if you're creating something where you say, okay, this character is so unique and so weird and so, oh, no one's ever seen this before, and it reflects me personally, and I don't care. Well, you got a very limited audience. But you do want to be able to, if there is something, you know, you can have all that weirdness, but if it's relatable in some way to the reader, then you've just brought something new. You've just added something to. You've introduced the reader to something new, and they say, "Well, okay, I understand this here. I can feel the same way. I can understand that." You know, empathy. You can, you know, the character. A reader, you know, may hate a villain, but he can empathize with that villain and why that villain is the way it is. You know. But if you can't even be empathetic to the hero, forget it.
Yeah, it's funny. So as I was developing Gods and Gears, like I said, it was idea first, and then I had to learn story needs to come first, and story came from driving the characters, and driving the characters came from finding that thing that was in me that I thought other people would identify with, and so it came down to, I didn't make let's say Eli, our character Eli, the younger of the two boys. I didn't make him somebody who likes to draw comic books, because that's a far fewer amount of people like to draw comic books,
right.
And maybe he's not allowed to. That's the thing. He wants to, but he's not allowed to. There's going to be a group of people that are like, oh my gosh, I totally identify with that. But that's going to be this big group of people. But the thing with Eli is he lost his grandpa, and he loved his grandpa quite a bit. And his grandpa was his best friend to him. You know, that every kid thinks that. And he's lost his grandpa, and now he's trying to chase after the thing his grandpa was chasing after, almost in a way to be with his grandpa again, in a sense, to try to be. So to be like him is to be near him. Okay. And that touches I get so many messages from people, they're like, I miss my grandpa too. Wow. I miss my grandpa too. And that's because that was based on me missing my grandpa. And I knew a lot of my friends, when their grandpa died, and not that you don't miss all people, but there was something about boys losing their grandpa. Right. You know, that it had that connection. And I don't mean just boys, but that was, generally speaking, that's who I was talking to. And so that connected with a lot more people than some strange quirk that lies in me that I tried to put into the character. It was, no, put in that generational love, that family thing that everybody feels.
Well, then that should be able, you should be able to, generate more than, you follow that thread. And because it's almost a never ending story, in the sense of there are goals, right? You're going to carry on with that, because, you can't, it's not the type of story that really comes to an end. It's the characters, learning about themselves and developing and changing over a period of time, while going through the overarching storyline is doing that. But it's something where, as they go through trials, tribulations, and what have you, to trying to reach that goal, they're finding more about him. But there are still points where there can be, there are stopping points, like, okay, that's the end of that a phase of my life. That's my, that's what happened this time, and so on and so forth. And that was something that, that I don't think people, the creators today, or they have been given the chance to do. I mean, I don't fault, as much as anything else, I think the fault of just trying of the mercenary and the monetary aspect of DC and Marvel trying to force as many sales of a storyline as possible, creating this one universe where everybody has to touch base and this and that, and you have to read 5 series to be able to understand a basic story line, and that's so on and so forth. And if you miss something, you don't understand. If you read it in the wrong order, what's going to happen here? It's crazy, But at $4 a pop for an issue, come on, that's crazy.
No, it's ridiculous. When Netflix costs $10 or $15 a month, and you get basically unlimited entertainment, and we're charging $4 or $5. They had an X-Men book last year that was $8 for issue 1, $8.99 for issue 1, and I think it was oversized. But for one issue, it was $8.99. I wanted to just send $8 to the writer. Yeah, like I'd just rather send you $8 than buy the book. No offense. But the price for what you get. And I mean, I'll be fair. Not all books, but oh man, a vast majority of the books, especially by the big two. I don't want to pick names or anything like that.
No, understood. But there is the aspect of our like, for example, like I'll be crowdfunding mine, my comics, and that's the only way I can go. but the reality is to crowdfund something where you can actually, we're not even talking about making money. We're talking about being able to just keeping it, functioning. I mean, there's no way I could pay, to raise money for how much time it would cost. I would have to, let's say, the reality of doing a comic page today, in terms of actual physical work and the costs and such, is really about $300 a page. If you take a pencil, inking, lettering, coloring, you divvy it up in however you want to do. That's not even the equivalent in terms of what we call inflationary cost adjustments to what was being paid during the 30s, the 1930s, 1940s. I mean, it could be like $40 a page in 1940. That's a lot of money. Now, but they were only paid. They only made, like, I think it was like they got 4 cents an issue. I mean, like, they charged 10 cents an issue, but they got back, after distribution and costs and all that, maybe about 4 cents, and printing and what have you, so on and so forth. So, they didn't really make that much money, but people were making a living on it, and you can't do that.
No, you can't. And I don't mean that to sound disparaging about the industry or disparaging to young up-and-coming inkers or artists, but I tell them this stuff all the time. And right now there's these reports going around about how good the comic book industry is doing based on how good Scholastic sales are. Meanwhile, the direct comic book market has gone down like 9% or something like that. And even if we had gone up a couple percent, it's funny to me, people say it's going so well. Meanwhile, jobs are being cut and page rates are being cut, which is the number one sign to me things aren't going so well. Right. And inarguably aren't going that well. So an inker in the 80s at Marvel, an average inker was making anywhere from $200 to $300 per page for inking. Like, you could make a living. Yeah. The inkers that were inking one book could send their kid to college. They could pay their mortgage. Everything was set up for it to be a job. Whereas now page rates are so minimal. Editorial is such a mess across the boards that deadlines are always super far behind. So most inkers don't even get to finish a whole issue at a decent page rate anymore. So it's not the same as it was. They're not paying living wages,
right,
anymore. And you're not allowed to say that. If I say that, I'm some hateful guy that doesn't believe in the comic book industry. Meanwhile, I'm just a dude who's been around for 20 years and has watched this happen.
Right. Well, I totally understand. I mean, I understand that feeling. As an animator, as someone who got into business in '75 and saw it go from nothing, because basically there were a handful of people, from the old days, and there were no new people for 20 years, and so I come in and it goes great for the next. It develops and grows for about 25 years, and then gets slashed in 2000 with computers taking over totally, in terms of the art and whatnot. So things changed so much. But anyway, in terms of the people who most likely will be looking at this video here on YouTube for information, people who are creators, crowdfunding is pretty much the only way that you're going to see your vision out there. You can't go to a comic book company unless it's, someone like Alterna. But then again, if you don't fit into, if you don't, you may not, fit with a small company. They may not want to do your work. So the idea is, how do you get your idea to be developed, and how do you develop it? Now we're not gonna touch on that all the way through here because there's just no way. I mean, in the we've been at this for about 55 minutes, and maybe another 10 minutes. There's too much going on, but I'd like to do more of these kinds of, we could stop here. We could not stop here, but I want to talk a little more about it, and then do some more, in terms of actually, how do we do this? How do we, have an ongoing series? Because as you can do it with all kinds of artwork, but story still has to be king. And if you don't know how to do story, Michelangelo or Da Vinci or Kirby or what have you, all you're doing is drawing a page, and so and so we need more of that. But what I kind of want to talk a little bit about is how you create, just creating a world, because you have your character, you have your world. Now, if you have character and world, then there's all kinds of things that you can do in that world. Plots are all, I mean, the things can happen to you, and the character wakes up one morning and he realizes he should have been doing such and such. You keep on going that way. And that's basically what an ongoing series is. To me, an issue of 22 to 24 page story, you should be able to tell a complete story in that length of time.
Definitely.
It's not more complex, but it with leads up to the next one. Say, okay, bring the audience back in. So, for example, for Megamoose, Nicky Nartzen, Megamoose. Nicky Nartzen is a bullied kid. He attends a private academy, and he is it's both boys and girls. He's about 12 years old. He lives. It's kind of like an academy in the school of Harry Potter. The old British uniforms, jackets, and whatnot. Well, he's the bullied kid. Okay, and his parents are they're jet setters. It's almost like being an orphan, because they've thrown him into this school. They hardly ever see him. He hardly ever sees them. So he's bullied. He has to deal with getting swirlies and whatnot. So what happens is he winds up. He winds up. So that's his world. He's bullied. He's in this place, and he runs across the janitor, who happens to be a wizard, and he becomes sort of the sorcerer's, the wizard's apprentice. He comes on, and he's given a magic feather, and by waving his magic feather, tickling his nose, he sneezes, and he turns into Megamoose with all of the powers of all the animals, and there's a lot of those powers. And so
that's awesome.
His thing is, though, no one believes him that he can do this. And he says, well, his whole thing is, everybody says, you're fake. You just did this with special effects. You are not this guy. You are not this Minotaur character. And there's an aspect of him wanting to be he doesn't want to be a nobody. He wants to have he wants to be accepted for being special, but no one will believe him. So there's your basic premise of this.
And that's your thing that connects to people too, is that he wants to be special for this thing that he is, that others don't recognize in him. And that's so universal. Even though we don't all turn into giant, powerful moose, Nicky's predicament is universal.
Yeah. So that's where
that's great.
That's where I kind of figured that my goal with my comics is to reach kids that are under the age of what normally you would see in a store. You know, these are the new kids that you have to grow an audience of comic book readers, but there's nothing, you know, other than, you know, the DC and Marvel's, you know, junior kids and things. They really have they're just right as though they were young adults. I mean, like they were just, you know, it's Batman, Kid Batman. It's not the same way. Kids at the age from 4 to 11, 12 have, before they're, you know, prepubescent, they have different interests and likes than from those who are into their teens, fast growing into it. So that's where my goal is with Snuffy and Zoe, the kids from 4 to 7, and then from 8 to 11 is for Megamoose. So those are the two series, and that's the kind of thing that I try and put into each one of the stories, is the element of what it's like being a kid and, you know, relating to them.
Yeah, I get the sense from the few, they call them YA, young adult novels or graphic novels, that they push towards the young adults. A lot of those tend to be almost, I don't know how to describe this. It's like a children's book that is written for an adult. It's almost, that sounds weird, but it's like, it's not actually aimed at kids. Like, you read it and you're like, a kid is not going to like this. Right. And then you read reviews, and a bunch of adults are loving that it reads like a kid's book. So there's this weird fan base that likes stuff that is directed for kids, but not really directed for kids. It's a weird.
There's a certain
phenomena. It's a weird phenomena going on right now.
Yeah,
it's like purposefully immature writing, but that doesn't connect to immature writing. Does not connect to kids. You know.
I think that everybody is. People forget what it's like to be a kid. There is a certain aspect to this where the I'm going to say there is material. My growing up, there was a certain amount of innocence in the material. There isn't a lot of innocence. Dogman has innocence. Okay. Captain Underpants has innocence. The stuff that the Scholastic Press is doing is aiming at a young group, a younger audience, whatever they're, because there are a lot of books. They just sell a lot of Dogman and Captain Underpants and maybe a couple of other series, but basically they have a captured audience because they have classroom material that teaches the lessons in those books. Okay, I'm not doing that, and nobody is really doing that, because I'm tired of everything being a lesson. I just want a story where people can enjoy themselves. So
yeah, I saw. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right, good.
I saw a writer recently, again, that was on Twitter. Won't name him or anything, but they said they wanted to write their DC books to be like an after-school special. And I was like, who is your audience then? Because after-school specials are trite, contrived lessons for kids that most of them already know, but were put together by parents groups that are like, if you're going to sell products during your commercials, you got to have a lesson somewhere. Like, that's what an after-school special is. So I was like, if you're trying to write an after-school special as a comic, who are you trying to entertain? And who is entertained by such things?
Right.
Like, I want a less, like, lessons I learned in comics were all things that, like, things I was shown in a book, and later my mind developed something about it. It wasn't somebody saying this, this, and this, and I was like, oh, well, now I think like that, and I enjoyed the story because of that. No, that's not how it works.
Okay, yeah. Listen, you know, I mean, if you read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, there's a lot of lessons in that, but I don't think it comes with a class curriculum.
Exactly. It's not. It doesn't even preach to you about the rights and wrongs that it expresses. It just shows you the actions and the consequences.
Right. Yeah. And
which is what a good story does.
Right. Yes. You know, don't beat me with your ruler. I mean, I'm not going to. I don't need to know this here. You know, I don't want to have agendas. You know, which is
exactly.
Why, you know, teaching agendas are just a pain in the neck. You know, show me a lesson, but make me have to think about it. You know, there are things about this you say, you know, to have at least in the conversation, if you're gonna say something, and make it worthwhile, make it as part of a conversation between the two characters, not about just you should think so and so, but you know, say in the conversation is that, well, oh yeah, okay, it's character development. You know, that's I mean, again, go through all of that and just so, but that's good writing. I mean, that's it has to be, you know, in there, and you get caught up in a moment, and then you think about it and say, oh yeah, that it has to hit you afterwards.
Exactly. A quick example I have was in developing Gods and Gears, which if we talk again next time, seriously, Gods and Gears went through so many changes. Like it went through so many ideas and structural changes to become what it was. But early on, since they're dealing with the jungle and the South American jungle, I wouldn't call myself an environmentalist, because nowadays I feel like that tends to be an extreme, but I am concerned about the environment. I always have been. I grew up near the beaches, and we were part of beach cleanups and things like that. So I was thinking that, like, oh, you know, part of the story, I'll express the importance of the rainforest, and I'll push some of that. And whenever that kind of came into the story, it honestly, it felt like a commercial for the rainforest all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize that, like, oh, the actual way to show this is to just have the rainforest be important to the characters.
Yeah.
And have the jungle be important. And this could be something I could build over the series, or we ended up not really making it an issue in the first run, because it just didn't fit the story. But the importance of the jungle is there. And as we go on, we play with the importance of that. And all that's doing is letting someone understand that, like, oh, the jungle is important because X, Y, or Z. It's not telling them, you have to feel this way about the jungle. You have to think like I think. This story's going to hammer home the importance of farming and cutting down trees. No, because that's not fun. And B, that's not how you get somebody to think something's important. You don't hammer them over the head with your agenda or whatever.
Yeah. And that's so yeah, but again, that's bad when you hammer the reader. That's bad writing. That's not. It's not organic. It's just, boys and girls, here's our answer or our lesson for this chapter. That's
exactly.
You know. So well,
and no one wants to get the newspaper the next day and check that first panel and have it be, Do you remember your lesson from yesterday? You're like,
Yeah.
no, you want it to be the pickup of the story and the adventure from yesterday.
Right. Well, that's great. I've enjoyed today and this session. I always enjoy talking with you. I think we should.
I do too.
I think we need to carry on because, in the next, maybe a week from now, do the same sort of thing and just go into just carry on with what is it what's the next step? You have an idea. Okay, well, how do you go about doing it? And the only way we can get people to, or the industry needs more people who are not just trying to sell toys. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's do something else besides that, And so, anyway, well,
let's entertain.
Yes. What is entertainment? Yes. We can always talk about how to draw something, but what are we drawing? So, all right.
I'd love to join you again if you want to meet up again next week. Anyone that watches the video, if you're in the chat or if you're watching it later, let us know. If you want us to talk about this more, we will.
Yeah, you just give us put it down in the comments or catch us on Twitter, because we're always on Twitter. You're at what, Ryan Wynn? Was it
at Ryan Wynn?
Okay, and I'm at Celestri John. So we're there all the time, pretty much. So anyway,
whenever you need us.
Oh, pardon?
I said whenever you need us.
Yes, yeah,
we're there for you.
The dynamic duo. Okay, listen. Thanks a lot, and you all take care now, and see you next time. Bye.